Welcome to Plus One Forward, the podcast powered by the apocalypse, where we talk about tabletop role-playing games using or inspired by the apocalypse engine. I'm your co-MC Rich.
And I'm your co-MC Rach. Today we have Adam and Thryn of Furtive Shambles. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you for having us.
How long have the two of you been playing Powered by the Apocalypse games? What was your gateway?
So for me, it was actually Apocalypse World, probably a decade or so ago. It was one of the first games where I kind of ran it, and as soon as I ran it, I was like, oh, this is a way of playing games that really suits how I want to play games and how I want to run games. I think The Quiet Year was the other formative one for me. Those two games kind of came along at the same time, and I was like, yeah, this is great. Why am I playing all of these other games when there's this kind of narrative-focused way of playing?
That's quite a 1-2 punch there in terms of different ways of looking at games.
Yeah.
What about you, Thryn?
The earliest sort of in the area that I played was Blades in the Dark, which was a very good I had only played sort of very traditional, quite sci-fi stuff up until then. I was quite a latecomer to role-playing games. I didn't start playing until I was in my 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was Adam who I played the first game of Blades in the Dark with. And the introduction was oh, do you want to do a game where you can do crimes and your character might die? And immediately I was like, well, yes, I want that very much. Yes, I do.
That is really cool. But why don't we jump on over here and read a Sitch? Read a Sitch.
In the Read a Sitch section of the show, our guests will spotlight some aspect of Powered by the Apocalypse play or table culture that they want to shine a bit more of a spotlight on. Now, my understanding is your experience is a little bit different than some of our other guests, and you have some insights about the world of actual play?
Yes, yeah, we actually started off doing actual play before we worked towards roleplay game, big design stuff.
Oh, so you started with the joy of playing.
We
then
did.
you
Well,
moved to
I
the
did.
designing. Now you're
I did.
selling, so soon you'll migrate to the I hate role-playing games as a culture.
Yeah, we're on that timeline.
Okay,
No,
good.
Adam had been a designer for a long time before, but I came into it through actual play because I'm much more of performance side, or I was at the time.
I think the next stop is actually con organizing.
Oh, right.
Weirdly, that was before actual play for me, so I've kind of done a...
You can go around in a circle.
The whole
going
bingo
around in a
card.
circle. Yeah.
So for our audience members who this might be the first role-playing game podcast they've ever listened to, just in case, what is actual play? Briefly.
Actual play is role-playing game recorded for an audience at its purest and simplest. So there are loads of ways that people do that. Some of them are very mechanics focused, some of them are very narrative focused, some of them edge almost into sort of radio play, audio drama territory. But at its core, it's just a game that is recorded for other people to watch and enjoy.
And how is Powered by the Apocalypse uniquely situated to benefit from actual play?
One of the things I enjoy about Powered by the Apocalypse games is because it's so narrative forward.
Mm-hmm.
The way that the move structures kind of work, you're constantly rolling forward into a new situation, new scene. It usually makes for quite good listening. And a lot of the mechanics that are built into the game really suit. As an audience member, you don't have to remember that someone's got 50 HP. It's, okay, you've taken one harm one way, and then that usually has some kind of narrative feedback that builds back into the game. And the way that Powered by the Apocalypse games have this kind of writer's room feel already, where you're collaborating to work out, okay, what's the next scene? How are we going to put this scene together? Who's where? What are you doing? How are you responding? Just comes across really well during actual play, I think.
I think as well, quite a lot of Powered by the Apocalypse games are so genre-focused, so scene-focused, so character-focused, that they work really nicely to replicate that kind of TV audio drama feel, where it's not just the GMs doing one thing and then another thing and another. It's not just a series of events, right? It's like a building of tension, and it's these encapsulated moments of drama that link to each other, but you don't just have one and then another and another. You can kind of hop around a little bit within a lot of the PbtA games. You can have your flashbacks, you can have your sort of scenes going parallel to each other, and the way that you play them, because I edit our actual play podcast, I'm the one who takes the audio at the end and turns it into the final product that people listen to. And the way that we play a lot of scenes in PbtA is structured so nicely around that building of tension and then that release of tension that often I'll find myself splicing a scene we played first and a scene we played second into each other. So we're bouncing between those characters and seeing how this feeds into this, feeds into this, feeds into this, which is a really nice way of letting the audience understand the narrative as it's happening, even though that's not how it was as you played.
Interesting.
Sounds like an interesting editing challenge as well.
It is a very interesting editing challenge, but that is much harder to do when you're really reliant on things like the progression of the character sheet. Because obviously if you're splicing backwards and forwards and the character sheet has changed really significantly between those two scenes, it doesn't necessarily make as much sense as, well, these two narrative points happened at the same time.
I was going to say on the tension as well, one of the things I really like, I listen to a lot of Friends at the Table, which is an actual play podcast that uses lots of Blades in the Dark and Forged in the Dark and Powered by the Apocalypse games. And it's really clear to know when something bad is going to happen.
Yes.
Because it encourages like the GM to say a lot about... The GM isn't sat there like shielding off information. They're very clear about what the narrative stakes are at any given time. And it's like, if you're playing a Blades in the Dark game, that's like, oh, this clock is 3 out of 4 filled. If you're going to fail this roll, I can tick this clock, and then you know what bad thing might happen here. And like things like similar to that.
I think that builds into that point I was saying earlier about the, it's not just one event and then the next and the next. It's all built around that aspect of foreshadowing or knock-on effects and things. So you get this really nice up and down dramatic tension within scenes that sometimes can be hard to find in other systems. A lot of other systems are kind of an exponential upward curve, right?
Yes.
You've talked about how PbtA is good for escalating tension. And from the player perspective for the listener, I think that would be very clear what's happening because the moves have narrative hung off of them. It says, when you do X, roll. What about the MC moves? Because especially if you take it rules as written, the MC makes the move but does not speak its name. In actual play, do you find it more valuable for the MC to speak its name, or do you feel it reads to the audience what's happening?
I tend to be like in the MC role. And in also designing the game, we're going to talk about later, more and more I'm coming to be like, actually speaking the name of the move is great. In a lot of times, in a lot of situations, like you don't want to clearly state it all the time. But I think sometimes it can be useful to break that rule and be like, okay, I think I might do this now. Or in a lot of cases, especially in like an actual play, there's also often a time where I want to offer which move I might make because there are long-term implications for a character and that player and that player's arc. Sometimes it would be worth like mentioning those things and be like, or it might be like, do you want harm to happen to you or do you want to lose something that's valuable to you? It can be good to negotiate that. It can be good to make that clear to the audience that that's what's happening. I wouldn't say in every situation, but I think it can sometimes be good to be like, this is what I'm doing and this is why.
As a player and a listener with sort of MC aspirations as well, like I find that little bit of speaking its name, player MC back and forth in the actual plays that I listen to is nice for me to kind of understand how those tensions are built. Because obviously for some MCs it's a very practiced skill for them and they don't have to speak anything's name. They can fold everything into a story in a way where you just go, wow, that was really powerful and I don't care how you did it. But as someone who is interested in not just the story but how the story is being built, I think that little occasional almost fourth wall break to the audience of, actually, here's what we're going to do next, and we're going to explain it to you because it's not difficult mechanically, it's just I'm going to give you the flavor text of this move, and we're going to have a little back and forth about why we might do that. It's just this nice little, it's another one of those kind of writer's room glimpses where you see not just the story unfolding, but how it's unfolding the way it is and how you can make the game do that for you.
What would you say might be a challenge that you've met trying to play PbtA games in an actual play format?
It's very easy, especially because you're recording actual play, to be very ambitious about what you set out to do in a particular campaign or season and be like, okay, I can imagine this end point. If you're writing a book or building a TV show or something like that, you want to build in a narrative arc. of like, okay, we're going to start here, I'm going to end here. And Powered by the Apocalypse games can be quite resistant to narrative arcs in a lot of ways.
Yes.
That waterfall cascade of consequences can drift you out to sea.
Yes. Yeah, there are lots of times where in like some of our shows we've done that was like, okay, we want this narrative arc, and then you're just kind of, as a GM, just constantly like, okay, how do we keep this loose enough so you're kind of foreshadowing a thing, but also there are different directions to it and getting there. And that was a nightmare. I wouldn't fully do that again. And I've seen it in lots of other shows. Like, you see it in, like, lots of... Like, in Friends at the Table, where you can kind of sense that that's what happened because you can hear Austin in, like, a feedback session being like, we made a really ambitious season. Some of it worked really well, some of it didn't. And there is a tension between your instincts as people creating a piece of media for people to listen to and the instincts of the story, which is very good at moment-to-moment narrative arcs or short-term stuff. Like, clocks are basically kind of create that, and like rollbooks create like short narrative arcs, and those two things clash together quite a bit.
Yeah, you do get a noticeable narrative drift, but you're constantly course correcting or not as it works out for you. But
yeah, in the season that we tried to do a big narrative arc, it was a Revolution season, and we started in this place where it's like, okay, this is going to end with all of you gathered up and on a stage about to be executed. That's like the big reveal at the start, and it's like, okay, I regret this by like session 3 or 4, and I'm like, because, and I think the thing I found is like, keep it as loose as possible about like how you get there, but like you can kind of signal where you're going without signaling the direction, which is good advice anyway for any role-playing game. But yeah,
Thryn, as an actual player,
mm-hmm.
when you approach a particular game session, would you say that you approach it as a player at a table or as an actor for an audience? Like, which is the stronger pull? I would imagine your inclination is to say both, but I'm not going to allow you. No.
Forbidden. No, that's a really good question, and we get asked that a lot. And honestly, the answer is I definitely approach it as a performer, because approaching it as a player is great for me, and it's great for us as friends, and it's great for the table, but it's not good listening. There's definitely like a line to walk where the way that you play with your friends isn't audience accessible, right? It's more in-jokey, it's a lot more freeform, it's a lot more loose. And approaching it as a performer, it's much more about, what do I think is going to be really interesting to listen to? I find I make a lot more hard choices when I'm recording for the AP rather than playing at the table. I'm much more inclined to lean into, this is a terrible idea, but the dramatic effect of it will be superb. So we have a lot of sessions that aren't recorded when we are recording the AP, where we touch in with each other essentially and go, is it okay for me to do this to your character? I've had this idea and it's going to be great, I think, but I don't want to just throw it at you live on the table. Like, can we go some places that might be difficult? So there's much more of that negotiation, I think, when you're playing for an audience rather than playing for yourselves.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Definitely performer.
We've talked about how the mechanics of Powered by the Apocalypse support good actual play. But what about the playbooks? The structure of playbooks is very different from the character sheets you'd see in other games. Do you feel that helps support an actual play production?
Yeah, I think it absolutely does, because especially with actual play where you're not seeing the character sheet, right? Like, everything that you know about that character has to be audio. It has to come from the play. And I think there's a nice thing with Powered by the Apocalypse games where they tend to lean into that introspection a little bit. It's showing you something about the character through the moves that you're given and through the way that you create your character, and they tend to ask more of you when it comes to, well, why is your character here? Like, how do they respond to the world? What are the things they're interested in? What are their motivations? And those are all things that are quite hard for an audience to grasp just from what you're doing moment by moment, action by action. But if it's built into the rule set and you're constantly having to bring that to the table and say, well, I'm going to do this because I have this bond with this person, or because I have this move that triggers when I'm feeling this certain way, or whatever, depending on what genre kind of game you're playing, then you get that nice, almost narration-y insight into a character's motivation, not just their actions.
I think one of the things I find really interesting about playbooks or rollbooks as well is the way that they almost have a story written into them, at least in the newer wave of Powered by the Apocalypse games. They tend to, as you advance, there's almost like a little narrative arc kind of contained within them, which is really nice. I was listening to Feelings First, which is Under Hollow Hill's actual play.
Mm-hmm.
And they all have like these really clear, okay, we're going from winter to summer and changing the seasons, and each one of them kind of has a role and a place they might go in the story, and you can see that clearly. And like the combination of each rulebook that each player chooses gives you this really nice, oh, this is the particular story we're telling within this genre.
Feelings First is a really good example of that kind of like rulebook really leaning into leading the story, I think.
Yeah.
Well, this is quite exciting, but I know that you're also here to talk about a game you've designed. Why don't we go over here and open our brains to it?
Open your brain.
In Open Your Brain, our guest or guests discuss an Apocalypse Engine game or a mechanic if they aren't a designer. But luckily, both Thryn and Adam have a game to talk about. We're talking about Ryne. What's the setting? What's it about?
Ryne is a wild fantasy game inspired by things like Studio Ghibli, Princess Mononoke, Tales of Earthsea, and Shadow of the Colossus, things like that. It's designed to tell slow burn fantasy stories in a world that's like big and weird and fantastical in a lot of different ways. The game itself comes with like a setting built in, but it's like very loose.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of give you, here's the setup of the world, here are like the 3 or 4 truths about the world, but how it works particularly you create through play. It's a world that's fraying. It's a world that's in its dusk. It's held together by broken titans that people call the Remnants. And each of these titans is like a big pillar for the world. It's connected to a domain, sort of in a similar way that like a Greek god has like a concept that it represents. Could be harvest, curiosity, the first bloom of spring. And the kind of interesting thing for the world is like the entire landscape around each titan is shaped according to the concept that they represent. You play as the people living in that world. And I said like the world is kind of fraying and in its dusk. You're the people who have decided in one way or the other to face up to that. You might be a group of people traveling, doing some grand journey to find something to help yourselves or help the world in some way. You might be members of a community that is undergoing some kind of great momentous change. Perhaps the titan that kind of anchors your landscape together is fading in some way. Or you could be a group of people who are undertaking some project. Maybe you're trying to create a new titan into the world. It tends to focus on like the small scale, but also like the bigger impacts that can create. And it's all about people getting by in a world that is bigger and stranger than them, basically.
What mechanics are different in Ryne versus Apocalypse World?
I think the biggest one is instead of character stats, you will roll based on how you are feeling about the events that are happening around you. So it's not necessarily that your emotions are stats, it's that you have a set of emotions that really strongly define you as a character, and maybe there are some that you can behave very well when you're feeling them, or some that make you less confident. So you might be a passionate person, you might be confident, you might do very poorly under stress, or you might act up a little bit when you're feeling playful. So those would be your 4 stats, and you would assign +1, -1, etc. to them. And then whenever you are feeling a certain way and you have triggered a move, you'll roll with the emotion that you are feeling to see how well you can cope with the situation. And those evolve and change over time. You're not, 4 emotions for all of time. It's as you progress through the game, some of them will get stronger, some of them will weaken, you will replace some of them. You always have access to an emotion called fabric, which is everything else that you could possibly feel, but that doesn't define you as a person, things like that. And I think that links in quite well to growth for the characters as well. So the character sheets are very adaptive over time. You'll be replacing emotions, but you'll also be replacing moves. You'll be replacing your bonds with people quite frequently. It's really about the patchwork of being a person in the world and how you change as events around you change.
Yeah, and Thryn has been doing a lot of the layout design, and one of the things I really enjoy about like the growth side of it is for our like physical character sheets, there's lots of like cutting and sticking and replacing, and like, okay, I've got this move, and then through a harm system we have a thing called wear, which is like longer term consequences, and you might lose a move through that, and then you might sticker over it in a future time, so you're kind of building up this patchwork where you're like layering over stuff and constantly changing stuff, and it works in a really nice way because of that.
Becoming a different person through play.
Yeah.
Whew, I gotta be honest, man. You take my moves from my cold dead hands. I put a great deal of consideration into the moves that I choose. Whew.
We also let you advance and tweak them as well. So it might not be that you're replacing them. There are ways that you can like, okay, this is the move, and then I get like a better version of that move or a slightly different version of that move by just tweaking a trigger sometimes or giving a fuller version of that move in another time.
But it is always very narrative driven, like what you keep and what you don't. It's never just like, oh, well, you've done badly and you got hurt, we're taking a move away from you. It's much more like, okay, well, you were feeling this certain way so intensely for a really long time that that's had a consequence on how you are dealing with the world, and you're not capable of acting in that same way anymore. That move isn't accessible to you anymore because it just doesn't fit in with who you are now as a person. Things like that.
Is it ultimately a player's choice to give up that move?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
We always present it from the player side. Like, I feel like what's important to me is like when I'm designing this game is there's lots of consequences, but like the consequences always belong in the player's hands. Like it's always something that is giving you an interesting decision to make. So like I mentioned, wear being our version of harm, and we called it wear because it can represent actual physical harm, but it might represent like your spirit fraying, or it might represent your field being burnt down or something like that. It's just a long-term consequence. And when you mark that, you mark it next to a thing on your sheet, which could be like a move or a companion or something else. But you always choose which thing that you mark that next to. And it's not like the first time you lose that move. There are like 3 tiers of consequences, so you can spread stuff around and do it that way. Or you can be like, I don't like this move anymore. I'm going to just put the stuff into there because I think that's interesting. I think it's interesting to, if I'm playing the guide character, not be as sure of moving through the landscape that I know, or something like that.
Yeah, I think it gives you a lot of freedom to bring a good narrative reason for why that wear has given you that consequence, right? If you put it where you feel it would most affect you. You know, this thing has happened to me and now I feel this certain way, or this thing has happened to me and I'm not confident doing this move that I was doing at the time, or things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, each of you can split this up if you wish, but now we've come to the crucible. What is your favorite move and why?
We are splitting this up. We could not come to a consensus about one favourite move. My favourite move is share a story. So Ryne is really heavily influenced by folklore, just kind of as a concept. It's very about that looseness of the world and the same story being told in a bunch of different ways, depending on who you ask, and things not necessarily being consistent. And so share a story is where your character, it's a basic move, every character can access share a story. And essentially, it's your character telling the people around them something they've heard about the world. And the potential outcome of that move is that that is true. So you can essentially layer rules into the world. You can tell a story about something that you've heard, and then that becomes one of the guidelines for play. So, like, I've heard that in this territory, you can't become a spirit, for example, because spirit in that area is all funneled into one place. You can't become one single spirit, you become part of the spirit of the territory. And there's a possibility that once you tell that story, it's based on truth. And then when you go to that territory in the future, you've got a rule for that territory that now exists from one of the players.
That's neat.
I like it a lot.
I think the thing I like about it is it really sits in contrast to like Pay Attention. It's almost like the opposite of Pay Attention style moves where you're like asking the Fates or the GM or MC questions about the world. You're making statements and then seeing whether it's true, rather than like, I want to know something about the world. I'm going to ask these questions and find out from you. And we've got both of those in there. One of the things I like is it lets players kind of flip between those two perspectives. I want to know a thing versus I want to say a thing and see how true that is.
Collaborative lore building.
So there's a die roll after that where it could or could not be true? Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Ooh.
Yeah, so on a success, it's totally true. Like, whatever you say is kind of true. And obviously it has to be something that...
The table has to kind of come to a consensus that that's a reasonable rule for your world, yeah.
Okay.
On a 7 to 9, you might pick, like, the story's become embellished in some way, or there's something hidden in the story that isn't accounted for, or...
So there's a kernel of truth in it. But...
Yeah. So there's ways you can tweak it. And on a miss, your story's usually false in some way. Like, it's like folklore where you go into it believing a thing, but it's maybe not actually based on anything. Or it might be slightly true. The MC has some space to play around with how true that is.
Neat.
And I think from the player side, you then have space to play around with whether you knew that it wasn't true or not. And the reason you told that story and why you might have told, a fabulously made-up tale to, say, the child in your group or something like that. There's space for you to be like, well, yeah, okay, it wasn't true, fine, but I told it for this reason.
Adam, it is your turn. What is your favorite move and why?
So I went for another one of our basic moves, and I think this was like partially inspired by the Firebrand stuff you've been doing, is we've got a move called Confront, which is it's both like, our fighting move, but we can also use it in different ways. We're currently working on like how would you use it for like a social confrontation or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so like Confront is all about when you confront someone on equal footing and both of you refuse to back down, and you kind of get into this almost like a Firebrand's like duel.
Interesting.
So we kind of do away with dice. Yeah, you do away with dice and you take turns just kind of choosing the way that you strike at each other. So it could be like, okay, I'm trying to inflict wear, or I'm trying to reposition you, or I'm trying to counteract your argument in some way. And one of the things that allowed us to do that we realized was that because we've got the emotion system and there's some mechanical stuff there, you can use the emotion you're feeling in that fight to go like, no, I don't want that to happen. So if like someone like tries to strike you, no, I'm going to use this emotion to resist that. Or, no, I'm going to let you do that because I don't want to back out this fight, because once your emotion fills up, you lose the fight in some way, you lose the confrontation in some way. And the reason I really like it is it kind of gives a very cinematic feel to those moments. Because like violence is fairly rare in a game of Ryne. Like I think when we've been playing it, I think I've used it once or twice in all of the time I've been playing it. But it feels like it should be significant. And I feel like that's often true of a lot of the inspirations we've got, like Tales of Earthsea and Princess Mononoke and stuff like that. When people do come to blows, it often feels very like, okay, this is a moment rather than something that happens frequently, and dialing into the emotional side of it and like the minute or like the second by second side of it just I think feels really right for the game.
That's really cool. Well, all this talk about Ryne has me pretty eager to maybe get a chance to try it out. How do the two of you feel about the possibility of a little demo of Ryne?
Would love a little demo of Ryne.
Yeah, that sounds good.
I feel very good about it.
It is time to act under fire.
In Act Under Fire, our guests will run us a short demo of their game. I'm really excited to try out Ryne. Adam, are you going to be running the game for us today?
Yeah, I've got everything set up just for a short little scene that we can play.
Awesome. You've created characters for us. We're using Roll. This is the first time for +1 Forward AP is to use Roll, ROLE, which is a virtual tabletop that's very, very pretty. You have a cool watercolory map in the background that I've been assigned Meadowlark, the Heart. And friends, I'm sure you have no knowledge that the name Meadowlark means a little something special to me. As a young child, I once went to see the Harlem Globetrotters, And among them was a fabulous player by the name of Meadowlark Lemon.
That's the best name I've heard in a long time.
Right? And now, somehow, Meadowlark the heart in my brain looks like Meadowlark Lemon.
Why not?
I'm going to be playing Soriel the Guide, which feels like a very outdoorsy guide-like name. Very excited for that.
And I will be playing Ramzan the Binder. Also quite outdoorsy.
Yeah. I just went for herbs. Just to give a little bit of context to its characters, the guide is fairly obvious. They are someone who knows a landscape better than anyone. The binder is someone who can use threads of emotion and spirit to imbue devices and create, nice little artifacts and trinkets. And the heart is someone who is devoted to like a concept or idea in some way. Should we jump into our first scene? Or our scene?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Our singular scene. Let's go.
Yeah. So I'm imagining that you've all been travelling together. I've given Ramzan the binder a wagon. And the way I'm imagining this wagon is it's this great lacquered wagon with this strange assembly of devices on the back of it. And that, as you travel, is gathering strands of spirit from the world around you that you can use to create something. And I think what we can do is use each character a little bit to get an insight as to why you might be travelling and what you might be gathering. So I think the first question I'm going to ask, just to give us a little bit of a picture, because the guide has your home terrains that you're good at. What sort of landscape do we imagine that we're travelling through here? And feel free to go as wild of this as you like. And obviously the landscapes are kind of shaped by the Titans, so it could be emotional in some way or tied to a concept in some way.
Well, given the weather around here right now, I'm very struck by the idea of frozen dunes as being a terrain. Even though they're frozen, they aren't quite frozen water, and they're shapes that are twisted and churned by the environment around them. So they are impossible shapes that you would not normally expect of dunes. Like there's a dune that we're passing that is 4 stories high as a spiral.
Ooh.
But then kind of comes down as in a sand dune-esque shape towards the bottom.
I really like that.
I love that.
And I imagine Sol, the guide, is the person who's been brought on to lead this group through this terrain that they know so well. Ramzan, who is the binder, how have you adapted... You're skilled at creating weird and interesting things. How have you adapted your wagon to travel through this place?
I'm picturing the wagon as being pulled by my companion, which I have decided is a huge piece of driftwood, sort of shaped like an ostrich, that I have imbued with... I think I was going for curiosity, but I ended up with just a stubborn determination. So it's this big, weird, gnarly wooden ostrich situation that I have made snowshoes for. So I'm wearing 2 big snowshoes, and everyone's just kind of sat around the wagon. I think I've just put little shelves around the outside so we don't have to walk through the snow. We can sit on the side and be pulled along.
And then we have Meadowlark the heart. And what I'm picturing is the binder's good at collecting spirit and making things. The guide is good at leading you through strange environments. Maybe the heart, because you're devoted to an idea and you might be part of an organisation, maybe you're the person who's brought this team together to do something, to do some strange project in the world. Do you have an idea for what that might be?
There are a couple of things you mentioned in the previous segment about dealing with Titans. Rather than trying to build a new Titan, perhaps we're trying to reinforce a Titan that is fallen into decay.
Oh, that works really ningsly, because in my mind, Ramzan is a binder who can only work with a thing that looks like what they want to make. So the driftwood ostrich, they had to find something that looked enough like an animal to make it move like an animal. And if Sorrel is leading us through this impossible geographies, frozen dunes, maybe we're looking for the right shapes to fix the bits of the remnant that are broken.
That was what I was thinking too. We're looking for something that has been twisted by nature, but almost with intent.
Yeah.
And what sort of shape are we looking for?
Fantastic question.
This morning, friends, we are looking for an ear bone.
Oh, quite specific then. A delicate one.
Yes, yes, it's a Titan's ear bone, so perhaps it's not entirely delicate, but...
It may be the size of a wagon.
Yes, even bigger, maybe. But yeah, we're looking for a snowdrift that looks like it. So, one of the moves that the guide has is Forager.
Okay.
Which is when you declare that a feature or resource exists in a nearby wilderness, you can roll to try and lead people towards it. So I'm kind of imagining like Ramsden and Meadowlark describing something to Sorrel, and you being the one that is kind of pointing people like, okay, head this way, I think I've seen something over here.
Sorrel will, when she's described the type of ear bone, the type of shape we're looking for, she'll realize, oh yeah, I've totally passed by something like that before. It's just over this way. We walked past it, it's down this side trail over here. How would I roll, given that we're rolling with emotions?
Yes. The way it works is you start by saying how your character's feeling, and that can be anything. You'll have like named emotions on your sheet, but you can pick any emotion that you like. I've not filled in emotions on your character sheet because I think emotions feel so personal sometimes.
You can't tell me how to feel.
Yeah, exactly. So what we'll do is, if you choose an emotion, then you can decide whether it's something that should be on your sheet, and we can assign some numbers to that.
I think Sorrel's feeling confident right now. This is something she's had experience with.
Is that something you feel regularly? Do you think that should be one of Sorrel's named emotions?
Definitely.
All confidence.
Yeah. So you start with one at +2, one at +1, and one with -1. Which one would you like that as?
It's tempting to start actually with +2. Let's go with +1, though.
Okay.
Just for funsies.
Cool. So, yeah, then you roll plus that stat. And for this move, on a 10+, it's there as you described it. On a 7 to 9, it's there but different, changed, or dangerous to get to. And on a miss, it's irrevocably altered or getting there exposes you to great danger.
Rach, how did Roll know how you normally roll?
I have no idea. I saw the dice move. I'm like, gosh darn it. It knew. It knew.
Oh. So you rolled a 5. So that is a miss. So I think you kind of move through this drift of snow towards where you think that this place has been or should be. And I think eventually you see this kind of ear bone shape ahead of you in the distance. I think as you draw closer to it, though, and as you begin to think about unpacking the wagon and doing what you need to do there, you notice that it seems to be sort of moving slightly. There's like a trembling to it as you get closer and closer. Do you keep going towards it?
I'm gonna tap Meadowlark on the shoulder and say, I understand ear bones are supposed to move, but do they move before you put them in a Titan?
They could. They could. The Malleus is a hammer. It would move. That's how the Titan will hear. I'm sure it's fine. Don't worry.
Because it's moving right now.
Do we need to chase it?
Ramsden hears chase it and is like leaning forwards and like encouraging, I'm going to call the ostrich Splinters, is encouraging Splinters to like hoof it. Let's go. The chase is on.
Yeah, I think at the moment you do that, the ear bone shape bursts from the snow and you can see that it's attached. Almost like, imagining like a hammerhead shark sort of shape where the ear bone is going across from it, like its head. There's like a little body attached underneath. And it's just this strange, uncanny, sort of supernatural folkloric creature just bursts out, all pale white, and it's like running away across the snow from you.
Well, I don't love that.
What do you do?
Ramsden, I think, is very focused on finding this thing. I think maybe focused is one of their strong emotions, and when they've set their mind to something, nothing else matters. So it's they kind of call over their shoulder, well, let's all hold on tight then. Here we go.
Oh.
Meadowlark starts binding down some of the things in the cart to make sure that they don't fall out, as if this
Just packages
is a thing that's
flying.
happened multiple times.
Gonna grab a pair of binoculars and see if I could see this tiny supernatural creature that would be perhaps the whisper spirit be whispering inside a Titan's ear if we didn't take care of it first.
Yeah, I like that a lot, yeah. So I feel like this sounds like a director-companion move for Remsen, which is like,
good.
Directing a companion to do something that they're good at.
Mm-hmm.
It might also be a help if Sorrel is directing Remsen with these binoculars as well.
I'm imagining it a bit like a rally driver and their directions person.
I'm also going to just assume that you've all got bonds with each other. Like, I think that just makes sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So let's do the help first, which is when you aid someone you have a connection with, say how you help them, and then you get to pick equal to that connection strength. So your bond will start at strength 2, so you get to pick 2 of these. They gain advantage, which is they get an extra dice and pick the 2 highest. They roll with their bond emotion instead of how they're feeling, which might not be useful right now, but could be useful if they're feeling upset or something. If they would mark an emotion, you do it instead of them. Or if they take consequences, you take them instead of them.
Well, I'm going to throw it out right here that I think my focused emotion might be -1.
Okay.
So
we often give chase, but not always effectively.
yeah.
It's concerning.
Yeah. So yeah, that second option would allow Remsen to roll with however they feel towards you. It's like that, someone reassuring you through something.
Yeah, I'm happy to help live with the complications, but will warn you my die luck is cursed.
Good.
Cool.
Okay, so what are we going for? Are we going for roll with bond emotion?
And Sorrel will take any consequences,
and
I think.
Take consequences, okay.
Yeah. How do you feel towards Sorrel, do you reckon?
I think this is something like trustful or like confident in Sorrel. Like, I think we've done this a lot and Sorrel shouts directions and I just do it. I'm focused on the thing we're chasing and I trust that Sorrel is dealing with everything else.
Cool.
Left, right.
Yeah. So when you direct a companion, say what you want them to do, then roll. So this is catch the thing that's running it away.
Yes. I want to go fast and safe. And then I'm rolling with my bond emotion. So that'll be a +2. Well, I'm going to go for trusting, because I think that's more in the nature of the relationship.
Yeah. Wow.
Well.
Incredible directions from Sorrel.
So you rolled a 13. So on a 10+, on a success, you do what you asked, and on 10+, you pick one. So this is your companion. They could come back tired or injured and take wear. You could owe them. There could be complications, or they could act out in some way.
Oh, act out in some way, you say? I think for this, I do want to catch this moving ear burn. So I think owing my companion maybe is a nice one.
Your mechanical pet has done a good job, and you'll need to reward it later on. Is
It's going to get some routine maintenance, like a spa day.
So you catch up to this creature that was running away. How do you do it? What does that look like?
Chaotic. I think it's like bits of veering around blockages and unsafe paths at the very last minute as Sorrel is yelling directions out to me, and I think they sometimes drive everyone just straight through quite a soft looking snowdrift, we could go through this is fine.
It's easy to walk through. I don't know what the problem was with the cart.
Yeah, and I think that this creature stops in front of you. I kind of imagine it probably towers over the cart a little bit, but once you've slowed it down, it hunches over and does a little sit, its knuckles kind of on the floor, and it's just looking around in this panicked way. Who steps up to greet it? Is that the right word? Or who approaches it? And how are you approaching it?
Well, this is
Meadowlark territory.
Meadowlark territory, yes. Meadowlark hops off of the wagon. His sandals crunch in the icy underneath. He walks close, speaking softly. Please, you've lost your home. We're here to bring you home, you see. My little malleus friend. Well, not exactly little. If you'll come with us, we can show you a place where you fit.
I think the creature's just looking round in a sort of half-panicked way, and maybe as you tread towards it, it kind of shuffles backwards a little bit.
No. See, you're all alone out here, and we can bring you a place where you'll have friends, where you'll be needed, where you become part of a whole. Please, don't be afraid.
Okay, this sounds like it's maybe a convince move.
Sure.
Which is when you attempt to convince someone, say what you want from them, and then roll. On a success, they'll hear you out, and then there are various pick options depending on how it goes. So how is Meadowlark feeling?
I think Meadowlark has seen the telltale signs of concern, possibly fear. He's feeling compassionate about this creature.
Yes. And do you think this is one of Meadowlark's sort of named emotions, or is it just a general emotion?
I think it's a named emotion for him.
Cool.
I think it's important for him to be a heart with compassion.
Cool. So the heart has a weird thing where one of the concepts fills one of their emotion slots. So for compassionate, it will either be a +1 or a -1.
+1 sounds good to me.
Cool.
All right, I'm going to add dice.
Oh no!
That appears to be a fail. Is there XP on a miss in this game? Can I at least feel good about
there
that?
There is not, unfortunately. We use like a milestone-based one for this. On a miss, the fates choose. Their demands are outlandish, they decide to act against you, or they take up your cause with damaging enthusiasm. I think just because we're doing a short scene here, but the idea I like is Meadowlark managing to convince this creature. Meadowlark has been very soothing, very calming, and I think over a little while, like, this creature seems to calm down a little bit. And when you start to talk about, where you're going and taking it back to a place where it belongs, it kind of looks around, looks at the wagon that's been chasing it, and just kind of suddenly, with all of the movement it used when it was running away, sprints forward and just picks up the wagon. And you just hear bits of it creaking as it carries it in two arms above its head and maybe reaches back to put Meadowlark on and then just starts sprinting on to wherever you're leading it. I was just imagining closing on this snow scene of the camera's static and this thing is running away with a wagon held over its head, and probably Ramsden more than a little bit concerned.
That's my wagon, sir. Sir.
I think you're on it. Oh.
Amazing.
Soriel running behind, yelling, "Meadowlark, it's supposed to listen. Why isn't it not listening?"
It just listened a great deal. It's fine. Catch up.
Splinters the ostrich just hanging from its harness, kicking its legs in the air.
You're going to have to give it such a spa day.
No.
Well, that was really fun. Adam, Thryn, thank you both so much for giving us a demo, a little taste of Ryne.
You're absolutely welcome.
Thank you for playing.
If our listeners want to follow more of your work, where can they find you two online?
For Furtive Shambles, which is our game design co-op, you can go to our itch store, which is furtiveshambles.itch.io or furtiveshambles.com. We're on Twitter at furtiveshambles. And we're currently running an Indiegogo campaign for Ryne, which is, I guess we'll give you the link to rather than reading out a long link. But that's just funded, and now we're trying to hit some stretch goals. And if you're listening to this a little bit after that campaign, we'll probably have some late pledges open as well.
Good. Well, thank you both so much for coming on +1 Forward and sharing with us Ryne.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
+1 Forward is a production of the Gauntlet community, Richard Rogers and Rach Shelkey. You can find us at gauntlet-rpg.com or follow us on Twitter at +1FWD. If you would like to support our show, visit our Patreon site at patreon.com/gauntlet. The games mentioned on this show use the Apocalypse engine, which is a creation of Vincent and Magay Baker. The music for +1 Forward is from the Savage Aural Hotbed CD Gomi Daiko. The songs used are Gomi Daiko, Metal Version, and Drowning Attitude. You can find more amazing tunes by Savage Aural Hotbed on their website, www.savageoralhotbed.com.
Listeners, we want to let you know that Hearts of Wulin, our PbtA game of wuxia melodrama, is now available as a PDF on DriveThruRPG. Hearts of Wulin emulates films like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon and Shadow, and TV series like The Untamed and Ancient Detective. It is inspired by the Chinese martial arts novels of Jin Yong and Gu Long and their many adaptations. In these tales, romance is as dangerous as a blade. You can buy Hearts of Wulin at the Gauntlet store on DriveThruRPG. You can find more information and resources for it on our Gauntlet blog, on the Gauntlet webpage at gauntlet-rpg.com.